We're going to take a look at neural integration. So one EPSP or one depolarizing graded potential is usually not enough to reach threshold and cause an action potential. So usually you have to add several together to reach threshold. So this brings us to this idea of neural integration. And what this is just in that postsynaptic neuron, you're going to be adding up all the EPSPs and IPSPs that are occurring at that axon hillock and see if threshold is reached or not. And if it is, then you can start an action potential. And so remember that we have two different ways that we can add these graded potentials together. So we talked about temporal summation and spatial summation. And before we get to that, just one other idea. We have divergence and convergence. So these are important to know about as well. So one presynaptic neuron here often does not communicate with just one postsynaptic neuron and vice versa. So we have a picture of divergence on the left. And what that means is that this presynaptic neuron is going to diverge and spread out. It has several collateral axons that it's going to synapse with several different postsynaptic neurons over here beyond. And this will spread the signal out. And an example of divergence that we're going to look at later is we'll see this happening in the patellar or knee jerk reflex. We'll see this divergence happening. And then the opposite of divergence is convergence. So this is where we have lots of different presynaptic neurons all converging onto one postsynaptic neuron. So it's just the opposite of divergence. And so what's happening here with convergence is we can end up with spatial summation. Because if we have, for example, maybe this presynaptic neuron, maybe this one, maybe this one, and this one all releasing neurotransmitter at the same time, that would give you spatial summation. So with convergence, we can end up with spatial summation. So a lot of times what happens with spatial summation, you will get hundreds and even thousands of different presynaptic neurons all converging onto the same postsynaptic neuron. All right, so let's just review the different types of summation. We have temporal and spatial summation. So remember that temporal summation, that presynaptic neuron is going to fire rapidly in a row. So it'll release neurotransmitter, open up maybe the ligand-gated ion channel in the postsynaptic neuron, and then fire again, open it again, and then you're just going to add those graded potentials together, and then maybe you reach threshold, and then you trigger the action potential. And then spatial summation, you're going to have two or more presynaptic neurons all converging on the same postsynaptic neuron, and these presynaptic neurons all fire at the same time. And so you'll add their graded potentials together, and then maybe you reach threshold and then trigger the action potential. So let's just take a look at some pictures from your book again. So here we've got temporal summation. We've got this presynaptic neuron A that's going to fire rapidly in a row. And you can see that A is firing rapidly in a row, and we're just going to add these depolarizing graded potentials, these EPSPs together we reach threshold, and then we're going to trigger an action potential when we reach the axon hillock here in this postsynaptic neuron, this big yellow cell. So that's temporal summation. And in spatial summation, we've got 2 or more presynaptic neurons firing at the same time. So maybe we have A and B firing together. They're both going to be creating EPSPs, or depolarizing graded potentials, in this postsynaptic neuron. So you can see we add their EPSPs together. We reach threshold at the axon hillock, and we'll create an action potential there. But what if we have presynaptic neurons A and C firing together? So A is creating an EPSP and C is creating an IPSP. So maybe A is letting sodium ions in and C is letting chloride ions in. Well, they would cancel each other out, wouldn't they? And so with this type of spatial summation, A and C just cancel each other out. And so you don't reach threshold. And so there's no action potential produced at the axon hillock. So that one would be inhibitory. Okay, and I like this picture. It's just showing convergence. You've got lots and lots of presynaptic neurons all converging on this one postsynaptic neuron here, and some of these synapses are going to be creating EPSPs in green, some of them are inhibitory, creating IPSPs in red. So it just depends on which ones are releasing neurotransmitters, and when you reach the axon hillock here, are you going to reach threshold or not? And this is an electron microscope view. So you can see all of these axon terminals from all these presynaptic neurons all converging on the soma, or the cell body, of this presynaptic neuron that's kind of hidden underneath there. So that's a pretty cool picture. Okay, and last thing to talk about with neural integration is frequency coding. So remember that the brain is going to use frequency coding to tell how big the stimulus is, because all the action potentials are the same size, so it can't use that. So if you have a stronger stimulus, so maybe someone is pinching you instead of just slightly touching you, maybe this neuron in your skin is going to be firing rapidly in a row here if somebody is pinching you. So it's going to be, maybe we'll have some temporal summation here. So it's going to be releasing neurotransmitter frequently, and we keep opening up this ligand-gated ion channel, and maybe we keep letting some sodium ions in. And we end up with one EPSP, and then we get another one, and we reach threshold and we get our action potential here. But if we keep opening that up and we keep firing really frequently, what happens with these graded potentials, let's say we come up here again, and we've kind of looked at a picture like this before, the more you stimulate this postsynaptic neuron and create these graded potentials, if you stay above threshold longer, you can trigger another action potential in that relative refractory period. And so as soon as you come out of that relative refractory period, you can get more frequent action potentials because you're staying above threshold that whole time. And so as soon as you come out of that relative refractory period, you can just have another action potential right again. And so your brain is going to see, hey, there's all these frequent action potentials coming in. So that means that someone is not just lightly touching me, they're pinching me really hard. Okay, so that would be frequency coding.